frustrating things about this format, to tell you the truth, and some of them are interesting. One of them is the issue of trying to talk to a conversation that happened 6 months ago, of which I wasn't a part. The other is now having planned to say some things to some people who aren't here today. And so, you know, this whole issue of how do you talk to an audience with your audience, you know, is constantly shifting around, is clearly one of the interesting things that gets staged by this format. I did want to return to this question of the 18th century notion of the public sphere, and just for a moment, in part because I think I would have described one aspect of the conversation yesterday, particularly the discussion, the kind of hijacking of the part of the discussion by the blogging issue, with a kind of flirting with the blog. I would have described it as a kind of audience envy, which is why we ended up with size. I mean, whose is bigger? Whose is bigger? So I think I'll just give my end point away now, which is to remind you all that it's not the man, but the motion. Now, I mean that in some specific way. So you know, and one other even maybe finer point on that. There was a very quick equivalence made between the apparent freedoms of the blog, freedom from the editor or whoever the control people mechanisms were supposed to be, and this kept getting referred to as democracy. And I really think that the issue is that it's the marketplace. And so it's not the same. It has absolutely nothing to do with the ideal Republican notion of the Republic of Letters on which this 18th century notion of the public sphere is located, in my opinion. So, I mean, you know the story, you might say over the last couple hundred years, what architecture has gained from this discussion about the public is the letter S. By which I mean, you know, up until the 17th, into the 18th century, every book on architecture was addressed to a single person, in effect, the patron, le monsieur, whoever he was. By the time you got to the late 18th and into the early 19th century, you know this story well, le monsieur had become le public, and somehow by today, as far as we seem to have been able to get, is le public. So I think that if you were to try to sum up the entire conversation that we had yesterday, was essentially the fact that we now have more than one public, and how do we deal with our own appetite for this potentially growing audience, this growing and uncontrollable audience, and how do we seduce them? And there was something about the blog that seemed to everybody particularly seductive. So I thought I would just share the irony that literally, I kid you not, in the middle of all of this, I received this email yesterday. So you too can enter the world of blogs. You're on the world of blogs. I find the whole blogging thing just sort of ridiculous. If anybody would like to answer this guy for me, please go ahead. His email is right there. I also thought that the notion that it was only in the blogosphere that you could be free to go outside architecture and talk about things that architecture apparently was much too idiotic to notice had any importance, like video games and that kind of thing. I mean, I couldn't help thinking, well, wasn't it architecture that invented the idea of going outside of architecture to find new, interesting things? This is a plate from Gideon's anonymous history from mechanization takes command. So you don't have to go very far away or very far back to get to these freedoms that are apparently now available only on Mac.